I never thought my life would come to this. Standing in my crumbling kitchen, hands still damp from dishwater, staring out at a world that suddenly turned against me. I'm Tiffany, 55 years old, and for 27 years I've built a fragile fortress of love and grit with my husband Mark in our worn-out suburban home. But when three menacing strangers showed up at my door, their cold eyes piercing through every crack in my defenses, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Desperation clawed at my heart, pushing me to make a reckless choice, one that could either save us or shatter everything I hold dear. What did I do to keep those wolves at bay, and at what cost to the man I've loved through every storm? Stick around, because you won't believe what happened next. Picture this. I'm standing at my kitchen window, watching a lone sparrow peck at the crumbs I tossed out earlier, its tiny beak tapping against the frostbitten grass. It's a small, fleeting distraction from the life I've pieced together over the years. My name's Tiffany, and at 55, I've carved out a quiet existence in a modest two-bedroom house in a sleepy suburb of Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Mark, and I have been married for 27 years, through thick, thin, and everything in between. He's 58 now, a man with a heart of gold, but a stubborn streak a mile wide. He spent most of his life as a mechanic, wrench in hand, until a back injury 3 years ago forced him into early retirement. It broke something in him more than just his body. I work part-time as a receptionist at a local dentist's office, smiling through the day while knowing my paycheck barely keeps the lights on and food on the table. We've raised 2 kids who've since flown the nest, leaving Mark and me to face the silence of our empty home. Our place isn't much to look at. The living room walls are webbed with cracked paint, peeling at the edges like old memories we can't quite let go of. The furniture, all secondhand, sags under the weight of decades, each scratch and stain a story of tighter times. Out in the driveway sits our old Ford Taurus, more rust than metal, coughing and sputtering, but somehow still dragging us from one errand to the next. We've never had much, financially speaking. Love and grit. That's what's kept us afloat. But even that gets tested. 2 years ago, it was late afternoon on a dreary Thursday, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and gray, pressing down on you like a weight you can't shake. I was in the kitchen, elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing at a stubborn pot when the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet hum of the house. Mark was sprawled in the recliner in the living room, lost in reruns of some old sitcom, the canned laughter a faint echo behind me. My hands were still slick with suds as I grabbed a faded dish towel, wiping them off with quick, uneven strokes. Something about that doorbell chime set my nerves on edge, like a warning I couldn't quite place. I shuffled to the front door, my worn slippers scuffing against the linoleum, and leaned in to peer through the peephole. My breath caught. 3 men stood on our porch, and they weren't the polished, suit-wearing types you'd expect from a bank or some official agency. No, these guys looked rough, hardened, like they'd seen things I didn't want to imagine. Leather jackets hung on their frames, scuffed and weathered, and their faces carried a kind of cold menace. The tallest one, wiry and sharp-edged, had a jagged scar slicing across his cheek. I'd later learn his name was Vince. Beside him stood a stocky guy, his face locked in a permanent scowl, who I'd come to know as Tony. And then there was the third, Ray, quieter than the others, hands shoved deep in his pockets, but something about his stillness made my skin crawl worse than the rest. My stomach twisted into a knot as I cracked the door open just enough to see their faces up close. My heart was already hammering in my chest. The air felt thick, suffocating, like it was pressing down on me with every shallow breath I took. I could barely keep my hands from shaking as I gripped the doorframe, trying to hold myself together. Beside me, Mark had shuffled over from the recliner, his presence a small comfort, but when I glanced at him, I saw defeat etched into every line of his face. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dull with a kind of resignation I hadn't seen in all our years together. It tore at me, knowing we were both trapped in this moment with no way out. My mind was a whirlwind, racing through every possible escape from this nightmare. Calling the police crossed my thoughts first, but I dismissed it just as quickly. We couldn't risk getting tangled up in legal trouble, not with that unpaid loan hanging over us like a noose. What if they dug deeper into our finances? Then I thought of borrowing from family, but we'd already exhausted every favor, every dime anyone could spare. Selling something, anything, came next. But what did we have left of value? The old Taurus in the driveway wouldn't fetch enough to cover a fraction of what we owed, and the few trinkets in the house were worth more in memories than money. I felt like I was drowning, grasping at straws that weren't even there. Then, in a moment of sheer, blind desperation, a wild idea slipped out of me before I could stop it. I looked Vince dead in the eye, my voice trembling so badly I could barely get the words out, and I offered to work off the debt. Not with money, but with my hands, cooking, cleaning, whatever they needed. I'd be their personal housekeeper for as long as it took to square things up. I even blurted out that I could start right away, that I'd host them for dinner that very night as a show of good faith. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, and as soon as they did, a wave of shame crashed over me. I hadn't even glanced at Mark before speaking, hadn't given him a chance. As soon as Vince, Tony, and Ray stepped off our porch with a curt nod to return at 7 p.m., I bolted for the kitchen, my heart racing like a drum in my chest. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely grip the doorknob behind me, let alone steady myself. I needed something to do, something to keep my mind from spiraling into a pit of dread, so I yanked open the cabinets with a clatter, pulling out pots and pans like they were lifelines. I decided on a simple spaghetti dinner. Nothing fancy, just whatever we had lying around in the pantry. A half-empty box of dried pasta, a dusty jar of marinara sauce, and a loaf of bread that was just shy of stale but could pass for garlic toast if I worked some magic. I slammed the pot onto the stove, the metallic clang echoing in the quiet house, and started filling it with water, my movements jerky and rushed. Mark followed me in, his heavy footsteps dragging on the linoleum. His voice came low and tight, cutting through the sound of water splashing into the pot. "Tiffany, why the heck did you offer something so reckless? Dinner? For them? Are you out of your mind?" I could feel the weight of his stare boring into my back, and I spun around, my nerves already frayed to the breaking point. "I'm trying to save us, Mark. What else was I supposed to do? Let them drag us out of here? Or worse?" My voice cracked, sharp and raw, as I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from shaking apart. He shook his head, his jaw tight, muttering under his breath, "This could backfire in ways we can't even imagine. You don't know what they're capable of." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous, and I had no comeback, no way to argue against the fear gnawing at both of us. We fell into an uneasy silence after that, the kind that presses down on you harder than any words could. I turned back to the stove, dumping the pasta into the boiling water with more force than necessary. The steam rising and the clock ticked closer to 7 p.m., and my stomach was a tight knot of dread as I stirred the simmering marinara sauce, the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling our cramped kitchen. I'd barely had time to process the reckless offer I'd made earlier, and now the moment of truth was here. The doorbell rang, sharp and piercing, slicing through the tense air like a blade. My hands froze mid-stir, sauce dripping from the wooden spoon as I forced myself to take a shaky breath. This was it. No turning back now. I wiped my hands on my apron, the fabric worn thin from years of use, and shuffled to the door, each step heavier than the last. When I opened it, there stood Vince, Tony, and Ray, their faces as unreadable as stone. Vince's scarred cheek twitched slightly, like he was holding back a thought, while Tony's scowl seemed etched deeper than ever. Ray, as always, lingered in the background, his silence more unsettling than any words could be. Without a word, they stepped inside, their heavy boots scuffing against the worn linoleum of our small dining room, leaving faint streaks of dirt behind. I swallowed hard, gesturing awkwardly toward the table I'd set with mismatched plates and silverware. They looked around, taking in the peeling wallpaper and the sagging chairs, their eyes scanning every corner like they were sizing up more than just the room. Vince eased into a seat at the head of the table, a smirk curling his lips as he leaned back. "Smells good, Tiffany," he drawled, his voice low and edged with something I couldn't quite place. "But I'll be the judge of whether this little stunt of yours is worth our time." My chest tightened at his words, but I forced a tight smile, nodding as I turned back to the kitchen to grab the food. The dinner that followed was suffocating. I served up plates of spaghetti, the steam rising in faint wisps as I set them down in front of each man, my hands trembling just enough to make the plates clatter softly. Mark sat across from me, his jaw locked so tight I thought it might snap, his eyes fixed. As the door clicked shut behind Vince, Tony, and Ray, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever, like a thick fog I couldn't shake. I stood there for a moment, my hands still trembling from the tension of the night, watching through the window as their shadows disappeared down the driveway. I turned to Mark, my heart aching for some kind of relief, maybe even a flicker of gratitude for getting us through this mess without losing everything. But when I met his gaze, there was no softness there, only a storm brewing in his eyes, dark and turbulent. His face was a mask of anger and betrayal, and before I could even open my mouth, he exploded. "How could you do this, Tiffany?" His voice shook, raw with emotion, each word hitting me like a punch. "I can't believe you'd put us in this position, making deals with men like that, basically selling yourself to danger without even talking to me first." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and I could see the veins in his neck straining as he fought to keep his volume down. Those words cut deeper than I could have imagined, slicing through the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I felt the weight of betraying his trust crash over me, even though every choice I'd made was to protect us, to keep a roof over our heads and that beat-up Taurus in the driveway. I opened my mouth to respond, but the lump in my throat choked me, and all I could do was stand there, feeling smaller than I ever had in our 27 years together. Tears stung my eyes as I finally found my voice, though it wavered with every syllable. "Mark, I didn't see another way. I thought this would save us. I couldn't just let them take everything." My hands gestured helplessly, reaching for something I couldn't grasp. His understanding, maybe, or forgiveness, but he just shook his head, his expression hard and unyielding, and without another word, he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the hall, each one a hammer to my chest, until I heard the bedroom door shut with a quiet, final click. I was left. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.